Hey everyone. I'm honestly in disbelief that I've reached 100,000 subs on this channel. I can't express my gratitude enough to you guys. Without the audience, there is no channel. And rather than making a commemorative t-shirt or doing some silly stunt, I thought I'd take the time to tell you a little more about myself. Hopefully it gives you a better understanding of who I am and what I'm about. So this is my Draw My Life. I was born in the largest city in Brazil, São Paulo, to two loving parents. I'm the youngest of two, which makes me the more rowdy one. My father was a man of science. He held a master's in molecular biology and taught for many years, until he moved to the US and discovered the bastion of capitalism. My mother, who was also into science, had her bachelor's in chemistry. Even though she never did anything specifically related to chemistry, she was a math teacher. Mine is a classic immigrant story. In the early 90s, Brazil was suffering a horrible financial crisis, and my dad called it quits on his home country and moved all of us to Orlando, Florida. Why Orlando? Well, my dad and my mom had visited Orlando back in the 80s as a pilgrimage to the US, and funnily enough, they thought all of the US was as clean and orderly as Disney back in the 80s, so they moved there. It's interesting looking back on it now because we moved to a place where we had no family and no friends. Basically wiping the slate clean. Our nuclear tribe had to deal with not having any family around. This was especially hard on my mom. She would keep a calendar that had a countdown of the days until she could go back and see her family. I remember her crying a lot when we were younger. My mother never being content with the quality of our education and being known as a perfectionist and a neurotic, so I never really got to go outside and play with the other kids when I got home because I didn't really know them. I remember much of my very early years was spent with my brother playing video games or making up stories with Legos. My brother and I spent a lot of time together when we were young, and to this day we still hang out all the time. It seems that because we grew up together and spent all that time, we really have developed similar personalities. I probably wouldn't be half the guy I am today without him. I was really big into Legos, like really big. My father always said that he saw me becoming an engineer, given an aptitude for math and my love of building things, but really it was more about a desire to create rather than to build. I was always fascinated by the idea that you could take disparate parts and combine them to make something brand new. It's why when I was taking piano lessons, I wasn't really that interested in playing some piece correctly, but I was much more enthralled in the fact that another human, just like me, put together this song and I could do the same. As I got a little older and was able to convince my mom, I started skateboarding. Like every other kid in the early to mid 2000s. I didn't have much of a natural ability for it, but I liked it and I kept at it. This was when I was in middle school, and my mom gave up on the whole move him to a school that's better for him and just put me in the zone school. So now, I knew plenty of people in the neighborhood because we all went to class together. I'd run around the neighborhood after school, causing trouble and being a hooligan, but outside of skateboarding, I made a very formative friend in middle school. Let's say his name was Alfred. Alfred was unlike any other friend I had before. He would make me laugh like no one had before. We were always on the same brainwave. We both watched The Chappelle Show and definitely informed our sense of humor. He was my best friend. We would talk about anything. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we had been able to keep that friendship going. We haven't spoken in years, not due to a lack of interest, but just because people move apart. I wonder if we're still alike, still similar. Unfortunately, after Alfred, I never made another friend like that. A true best friend. In 2005, my father was very prescient. He noticed that there was a housing bubble going on and didn't want to get caught in the tide as it came back out to sea. He listed our home for sale and did research on places with stable housing prices. He came across a sleepy suburb in Texas, Plano. So in winter of 2005, he brought all of us out to Texas and took a look around. He wasn't too enamored with Plano, but then found an even sleepier town called Frisco. He fell in love, bought a home with my mother, sold ours back in Florida, and we were headed to Texas. Before I got to Texas, I imagined it was full of cowboys and people saying y'all all the time. Some sort of Wild West, far away from my home where I grew up. I didn't particularly enjoy it the first few years. I had trouble making friends that I really liked. None of them were like Alfred. I felt that I had to pretend like I was someone else to get along. I found out early in my life that I was funny, that I had a gift of being able to make people laugh. I used it liberally when I was younger to make people like me. I always felt afraid that if they knew it was a show, I'd be outed. I had to maintain the funny guy appearance or else it would be difficult to make friends, maybe even impossible. What did people do if they couldn't make others laugh? How did they make friends? I remember from a relatively young age, I had this sensibility for art. I used to love going to museums, cinematography really spoke to me, and something as simple as a sunset would inspire me to make things. I'm not sure where it came from, but it's never really left me. I still have a huge appreciation for culture and art. Then one day, on an unassuming afternoon in August, my entire life changed. I was 14 years old. My mother and father came back to pick me up from school. I knew they had been going to see a few doctors because my mom had this cough that just wouldn't go away. I walked up to the car and realized something was wrong. My mother gazed out of the car window, not really looking at me, but kind of looking past me. All while my dad kept his eyes ahead, worried, contemplative. It's the same look I get these days when my face is resting. I guess I picked it up from him. I got in the car and I said, "Hey, what's up? You guys seem a little out of it." And my mother, barely speaking above a whisper, said, "I'll tell you when we get home." We got home and she sat us down in our still new Texas living room and looked at me with a tearful look and said, "I saw the doctor today. And you know the cough I've had?" "Yeah?" "It turns out it's a serious disease. It's called acute myeloid leukemia. It's a type of cancer." My heart plummeted. When I was very young, one of the strangest phobias I had was that my parents would be suddenly gone. And in that moment, I felt so small. I felt like I had no agency, no power to change anything. She started sobbing. I was paralyzed. I instantly gave her a hug, and I told her we were going to beat this, that we would find a way as a family. Nothing was ever the same after my mom got sick. Our lives were marked by my mother's extended hospital visits. She would often stay for weeks at a time due to her treatments. My father would visit her in the hospital every day, only to come back late at night. My brother and I would try to go as often as we could too. My brother was also busy doing his university work, so I spent a lot of time alone. I'd wake up, get driven to school by my dad, then come back home to an empty house in a sense that our life was just falling apart. Months went by and my mother's prognosis was not improving. Acute myeloid leukemia is a terrible disease. It's a cancer of the blood. The best treatment we had at the time was a bone marrow transplant. We tried everything to get her better. Nothing seemed to take. During this time, I started to discover my passion for making music. I was alone more often than not, so I'd usually be up in my room fooling around with my guitars and my pedals, testing, experimenting, trying to create something. Funny story, the whole reason I got into playing guitar was because of my brother. We both had been playing Guitar Hero and he managed to convince my mom to get him a real guitar. Me, being an opportunistic little bastard, asked him if I could play it when he wasn't playing. He said sure. About 2 days into owning the guitar, my brother didn't like it and said his fingers hurt while he played it, that it wasn't for him. Jackpot. I got to keep the guitar and I learned how to play it. In 2010, however, everything changed. My mom was slowly getting more and more sick, even though we framed it as her getting better because she simply couldn't be knocked down. She was a fighter and had more heart in her than my entire family combined. But one day, she couldn't fight anymore. After 2 separate bouts of being thrown into medically induced comas, having a respirator breathing for her, losing more and more week after week, her oncologist told us that there wasn't much else we could do. My brother came and picked me up from school one day, got me early out of class, and told me the news. We drove to the hospital and stayed there for days. It seemed like this nightmare that just wouldn't end. Then all of a sudden, it was over. She had passed. What followed after was a haze of events that I can barely recall, but I do remember going down the elevators and knowing that it'd be the last time I'd ride down them. The part I hate the most is I never got to meet my mother as an adult like I did with my dad. I was robbed of understanding her as a person. I was 17. In the months following my mom's death, I stopped caring about anything. I was partying with some friends from school constantly. I was drinking a lot, doing things I shouldn't have been doing. My rank at school dropped dramatically from junior year into senior year. I was an AP student, but you wouldn't have guessed it by looking at my grades and performance. In 2010, my father had a conference he needed to go to in Europe and offered to take my brother and I with him. This first trip to Europe is one of the most cherished memories from my teenage years. My brother and I roaming free and discovering old Cologne in Germany and then taking trains in Paris, being totally wrapped up in how much history the cities had. We ended up revisiting Europe in 2011 again. This time we went to Paris, Lyon, Rome, and Florence. They're trips I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. During my senior year in high school, I started up a band with a few other friends. I called it Copaset. Not really sure why, as seeing that's not a real word, but that's what I called it. Some of my fondest high school memories come from this time. I used to skip so much class that I'd have to go to Saturday school, and afterwards we'd go straight to practice and play some music. I remember those crisp spring mornings as I'd head out to go jam. We worked hard in the early part of 2011 to put out an album which, in all honesty, still sounds pretty great and I'm proud of. You know how some things you make when you're a kid you cringe at? I still love the songs we made. I'll link a few in the description. I played guitar and I sang. In 2011, my father abruptly informed my brother and I that he had remarried. Out of the blue, we picked him up from the airport one day and he let us know that he had met someone, he remarried, and she was coming to live with us. I didn't really know what to think. In hindsight, I can understand my father's need to be with someone. He never really had too many friends and would spend most of his time with us, his family. She came to live with us. She was from Brazil and barely spoke a lick of English. Luckily, my brother and I are fluent in Portuguese, so it wasn't a big deal. To her credit, she worked so hard to make it all work. She was a stranger in a strange land, yet she took it on the chin. She was amazingly kind to me. She took after me much more than my brother for some reason. She'd make coffee in the mornings and we would bond over it, because I'm a huge coffee junkie. She made food for me and tried to be as kind as she could. I wish I reciprocated even half of what she did, but teenage angst really gets the better of you when you're that age. We're still close these days, however. In late 2011, I was going to university for a, get ready for it, fine arts degree. Yep, the mathematically gifted and AP student who had a variety of talents was gearing up for a fine arts degree. But it wasn't without precedent. I had painted a lot in high school and I did a few portraits. Here's one of my dad. About halfway through the program, I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, so I decided to drop out. My GPA was abysmal and I just needed to figure myself out. As cliche as that sounds, I didn't do much of anything in 2012 except work at a Starbucks. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, quitting without a plan, hoping it'd work out. I never let go without grabbing onto something else first now. Another fond memory of mine is a hobby that likely led to my love of motorsports, and again, it all started with my brother. In 2010, he decided to buy a new car. He found a little gray Mazda 3 with a 5-speed transmission. I remember how excited I was that it was a manual car. I knew that manual transmissions made a car way more interesting to drive, so he bought it and then tried to learn how to drive manual on it, and decided that it wasn't for him. He hated it. He wanted to get an automatic. My dad was flabbergasted. Well, what the hell are we going to do with this car now? And there I was with a shit-eating grin in the corner, waiting for the inevitable to happen. The car was bequeathed to me, and I learned how to drive a manual transmission. I knew a few friends who were into cars, an old drummer of mine. We started hanging out and talking cars. I learned a ton. We would hang out with his older brother and a few friends of ours until way late into the night, doing silly shenanigans with our cars, laughing, talking, just enjoying ourselves. It culminated with me swapping my Mazda 3 by way of crashing it for a 350Z, car that I loved maybe a little too much. I learned how to drive better with that car and how to drift, and I just had a great time with it. Unfortunately, due to financial constraints, I had to sell the car, and subsequently, I kind of drifted apart from that group of friends. It seems that's a recurring theme in my life, to drift apart from friends. I've never really had a long-term friendship. By 2013, I got my life together. I went back to school, I bit the bullet. I changed my major to finance, which I wasn't too jazzed about, but I felt it was a good choice and it would get me to where I wanted to go. Then, in the summer, while I was taking some classes, I took my first college-level economics class with a professor that changed my life. I absolutely loved the subject, and I was good at it. Damn good at it. My father always told me when I grew up that life was about finding what you're good at, like what you're really good at, and then capitalizing on it. I made a 100 in the class, and my professor gave me a handwritten letter at the end of the semester asking if I'd chosen a major already, and if not, that I should highly consider economics, given my aptitude for it. I didn't make any hard choices, but I decided to take intermediate microeconomics just for fun. And a friend of mine at the time said, "Dude, no one takes that class just for fun. You're really weird. Just make this your major." So I did. Another funny story, I actually took AP Economics in high school and nearly flunked out of it. Years later, I got my bachelor's in it with a great GPA. It's weird how life works out, isn't it? In 2011, I noticed my hair was starting to thin. A mixture of temporary stress and uncertainty, I told myself, but it continued to thin. In those early years, I was so afraid of losing my hair, of being bald. How could I cope with being bald at such a young age? What would I do? I was still so young. How could this be happening? I would toss my hair to the side to try to cover it up. I constantly checked it in mirrors, living with the fear that someone would notice that my hair was disappearing. Until one day I said, enough is enough. I shaved it all off, and I never looked back. I wouldn't let something as silly as my hairline determine my confidence, my sense of self, or let fear drive my life. At the time, I didn't think it was a big deal, but looking back on it now, shaving my head was definitely a defining moment. It's when I stopped allowing fear to dictate my life. While I finished up school, my passion for music never waned. Even though my old band had parted ways, I still made tracks on my own. I became more interested in producing. I started learning more about synthesizers and how they worked, sound design, and soundscaping. I produced a ton of songs on my own, and then in 2014, I worked my ass off and made a cohesive work. I'll link that below as well. I'm super proud of it. And then at the end of 2014, I graduated with my BS in economics. My dad was there, he was so proud, so was my brother and our stepmom. Even though my mom wasn't there, it wasn't all bad. It was a bittersweet moment, but one that I'll never forget. In the middle of 2015, after I'd been working this boring office job for a bit, I decided to fulfill a dream and buy a motorcycle. After being into cars for so long, I wanted to experience bikes, and man, I never thought I'd love them as much as I ended up loving them. My whole life changed. Before I bought a bike, I didn't really do much. After graduating school, I started working. I moved downtown away from most of my friends and family, so it was difficult to hang out with people. But after I bought the bike, I had an excuse to go out and do something every day. It was so exciting at first. My dad absolutely did not want me to have one. He had a bike back in the day and he said they were too dangerous. So I decided to post up a video on YouTube and show him that I was being safe, wearing all my gear and riding normally. That was June 14th, 2015 that I uploaded the video to a throwaway YouTube account that I named Yammie Noob because it was an easy way to send my dad the video. I was going to send him a link the next day. On June 15th at around 12:30 a.m., I got a call. It was my stepmom. My dad and her had moved back to Brazil to start up a new business venture, and they were in the thick of signing a new lease for their office, getting everything together. I wondered if they knew what time it was here in the States. Maybe they just forgot. I picked up the phone, and instantly I knew something was wrong. She said, "Your father, he's sick. He's sick." And I said, "What do you mean, like some stomach thing? What's going on?" She said, "No, he's gone. He's gone." That familiar sinking feeling came back, the all too familiar feeling of being powerless, of receiving news that you cannot do anything about. I didn't want to believe her. I couldn't understand what was happening. What do you mean he's gone? He's gone. He's just gone. My father passed away, just like that, in the blink of an eye. All of our conversations, all of our memories, all relegated to the past. I was 22. It was a heart condition he didn't keep a close eye on. My dad was a real man's man, and that meant not going to the doctor when warning signs were present. But who knows? Maybe there's nothing anyone could have done. What happened after that was a series of events that caused me to turn from a man-child barely getting by working this crappy office job into a full-fledged adult. My father had affairs in 2 different countries we needed to take care of, my brother and I. We started meeting with lawyers, accountants, bankers, seeking counsel from a variety of people. I probably aged 10 years in the span of 2. I was 22, but I started acting like I was 32. I kept posting videos to the channel. In a way, it was like I was still talking to my dad, showing him what I was up to, even though he never got to see a single video. To my surprise, because I rode a bike that people were searching for, some of my videos were getting a lot more views, so I decided to take it a bit more seriously, posting more frequently, see if I could make something out of it. Then one day I posted a silly list video because I wasn't able to go out and film anything, and everything changed. The first video was shared to motorcycle.com, jalopnik.com, and just about everywhere. I thought to myself, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can make something out of this. So I kept making more videos, and here we are. This YouTube channel has completely altered the course of my life. If I had never posted any videos, I'd still be working that office job, I wouldn't have learned nearly half as much as I did, and I wouldn't have seen some of the amazing things that I have. I've met so many people through this channel from all walks of life and all over the world, and I can't wait to see where it takes me. It's completely transformed my life and allowed me to do so much, and I have you to thank for it. All of you who choose to watch my videos, who choose to engage with the content I produce, you make this channel what it is, and without you, I'd just be some weird bald guy riding bikes. So thank you, and thanks for watching.